But today we will be really talking about invasive species, invasive plants, and some creative things to do with them. My name, for those who do not know, is Marissa, and I run a little business called The Art of Ecology. And what that does is really focus on blending the arts and environmental sciences in order to create some sort of deeper understanding of the natural world. So I'll have programs like this, in person or virtual. I run summer camps for kids. I do multiple monthly workshops that are in person. And because I do focus on art, I also have some of my own original art for sale as well. And a portion of all of the proceeds always goes back towards wildlife conservation and habitat preservation efforts. I do just want to say before we get started, I have a bunch more of these little kind of virtual presentations throughout from spring to summer. So I've got, you can see here the list of them, but it's focusing on breeding turtles and amphibians and what to do when they're crossing the road in the spring. I have gardening presentations, creating wildlife habitat in your own communities, things like that. So I'd love to see you all at another one of them. But for today, we will be talking about, like I said, what invasive species are, some local ones. So we'll take a look at definitions and how those can help us understand what's going on with our local plant populations. We will look at some of the ecological impacts that invasive species have versus native species. And then we'll get into some individual plant species here and go over kind of how to remove them and then how to use them either medicinally or edibly. And finally, we'll wind up with some little tips on how to create sustainable ecosystems, but we're really going to focus on the removal of some local individuals. So first we got to start off with, what are we really talking about? What are invasive species? So we need to figure out, in order to understand what an invasive species is, we need to know what a native species is. And native species are ones that are from this local area, and they have been here for so long that they have co-evolved over time with the other plants in the ecosystem, with the wildlife that rely on them for food resources, for things like nesting sites or shelter. And these plants have also specially adapted to the climate of their geographical area. So, for example, here in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of plants who are used to crazy spring rains, high wind, and then suddenly summer comes along and it's a drought. And then maybe it's not a drought, and then maybe it is. Who really knows? We don't get all four however you say that word, meteorological seasons. We don't get those here in Pennsylvania, so the plants have adapted to that over a great amount of time. So trying to put those plants in other areas, they might not survive as well. They don't have the pollinators or the seed dispersers that they're used to. They don't have the soil or the temperature that they require. So keeping native plants in their geographical area is really helpful for them. Then we have invasive species, and these are the species that once they are introduced, they are not native to the area. They are brought over from wherever, but they cause ecological harm. And that is the kicker. That is the real defining piece between an invasive and then non-native or naturalized plants. Non-natives are, think of our ornamental plants or house plants. These are ones that they cannot establish themselves without human intervention, without greenhouse workers, without people going around hand pollinating these plants. They can't do it. And then naturalized plants are ones that are introduced and have the ability to establish themselves. But what really differentiates the naturalized plants from invasive ones is that they're not causing ecological harm. And for the most part, they might even be providing some sort of benefit. I use this picture here of the dandelion very specifically. It is not a native North American or Pennsylvanian plant. However, it is one that was introduced and provides such amazing benefit. It acts as a nutrient cycler, pulling up nutrients from real deep in the soil up towards the surface to make nutrients available to other plants that have more shallow root systems. They provide really early season food resources for pollinators. And because this plant can flower repeatedly over their lifespan, they also provide late season food resources for pollinators. In fact, I've been going around as I've been hiking, and I found at least like 5 dandelions that are in bloom, and it's so exciting. And it's a nice little, yay, spring is coming. And pollinators know that too. Now, a lot of these invasives, to be honest, I think they're beautiful. I think that the Lesser Celandine, yellow is my favorite color. So Lesser Celandine with their very cheery yellow flowers is really beautiful. But we need to understand that while we can still appreciate an invasive species, that there is still beauty to them. In this area, they are causing great harm, and it can threaten the rest of the ecosystem here and cause all sorts of mayhem. The reasons they do that is because they are super aggressive competitors. They will get into places and use their thick, dense growth habits to shade out or outcompete native plants. They can take over any empty soil that is available for them, and that crowds out the native populations. And that right there can wreak some havoc, as those native populations have evolved with the animals here. Animals need those native plants as food sources, and now they might not have it anymore. A lot of native plants also provide really high nutrient content for wildlife, and the invasive populations just don't do the same thing that the natives do. These invasive species, they're well suited and well adapted to the wildlife and the climate where they are from, not here in Pennsylvania. So many of them also lack proper nutrients. There are many times where deer or other herbivores may try to eat this invasive plant, and then they'll think, oh, wow, I'm full. My stomach feels full because I am eating, I am ingesting matter. But they're not getting the nutrients they require, and therefore they starve, or stunted development occurs. There's a type of butterfly that only lays its eggs on native flowers, and as garlic mustard comes in, they overcrowd this native, and the butterflies are like, well, I guess I'll lay my eggs on the garlic mustard because that's what's here. And the butterfly goes, the little caterpillar, when it hatches out of its egg, goes to eat the leaves, and it's not getting the nutrients that it needs. So the caterpillar doesn't have what is required to complete its metamorphosis, and it won't grow past the caterpillar stage. A lot of invasive vines also will suffocate or girdle the trees or the supports that they're on. Girdling just means kind of crowding out or suffocating. So when we see a lot of vines that are climbing up what looks like a dead tree, we can safely assume that that vine has girdled and suffocated the tree, preventing it from completing photosynthesis, preventing it from using its roots to absorb nutrients. So bad things happen there. And then they can actually contribute to erosion. Many invasives have very shallow root systems, which contribute to the rate of erosion. In a body of water on the edges in that bank area, that is called the riparian zone. Riparian zones are really important in that the plants that grow in that area will use their roots kind of like fingers and hold on to the soil. So as our crazy spring rains come in and flood the riverbanks, those roots, they're holding on, they're nice and strong. They don't let soil sweep through the river as the water comes by. But when those natives are now replaced with invasive species, they have really shallow root systems. They're not holding on to the soil in the same way that the native species do. And as those heavy waters rush by, it pulls the soil with them, contributing to erosion. And here in Pennsylvania, erosion and stream sediment is actually the #1 pollutant. It's not a chemical. And as these erosion occurrences continue, we're just piling on more and more sediment and contributing to a lot of the macroinvertebrate and water life from being killed off. So invasives overall, not the greatest thing here. They are wonderful where they are supposed to be. So these are some of my personal favorite kind of things to do or motivators to removing these invasive plants. The first, we can use them to create beautiful decorations. We can harvest things like Oriental bittersweet, which is a vining plant, and use those flexible vines, very similar to like a grapevine, to create wreaths. We can dry plants to create beautiful herbarium prints, put them in indoor vases for decoration. We can still appreciate their beauty. Many invasive plants also have wonderful dye constituents and phytochemicals like flavonoids or alkaloids that contribute to color. And when you steep plant matter in water with something called a mordant, you can create beautiful, beautiful plant pigments for textiles or for creating your own paints. And then what we're going to focus on today is many of them are edible. They're delicious to add to our own diets, and some of them are even medicinal. Now, the key piece here is being conscientious about how we use and how we remove. We want to be very careful about, as we are harvesting or removing these plants from the environment, are we now acting as accidental seed dispersers? When I go and dig up a plant, am I shaking its seeds everywhere? And now because I removed a plant, there's this bare patch of soil that all those seeds just fell into and are going to come back up. We want to think about after we're done eating or creating botanical dye, we have a lot of mushy, gushy plant gunk left over. That stuff does not go in your compost bin. For some plants, that doesn't kill the seed. Heat does not kill the seed, water does not kill the seed, and they can lay dormant until they get back into the soil. So we don't want to be composting our invasive species waste. We want to be very careful about our usage methods. And now we're going to get into a handful of individuals. These are all invasive species that have some sort of either edible use or medicinal use. There is one that we'll talk about for a hot second that is absolutely not edible. We should not be eating it, but it is wonderful as a skin ointment. We'll talk a little bit about the impact that these individual plants have, but I really want the focus to be on how to remove these and how we can use them, because that's the point of this presentation. It's eating your invasives. You guys can read, hopefully, and if you can't read now, you can go watch the recording later. So I'm just going to very briefly touch on that eco-impact section, and you guys can kind of figure out, yeah, invasives are bad. They do bad things to our local environment. But how we use them can all be different. So we'll start with the Multiflora Rose. This is very widespread. It can spread from seed dispersal or from canes that droop over and will touch the ground, and they will shade out lots of native plants. For roses, as many gardeners know, you can cut them, you can prune them, and they'll grow back with a vengeance. This is a rose. It's just not a garden rose. So frequent mowing or pruning back will actually encourage continued growth and fast growth. So to remove the Multiflora Rose, you need to be very, very persistent. Cut it back all the way to the ground multiple times a year if it does grow back on you. And be sure that when you cut it all the way back to a manageable size, dig up all of the roots of the plant that you can find. They have the ability to grow back, even if all that's left is a little bit of root nubbin. So be very conscientious as you're whacking it back. Make sure you're digging up those roots too. Now, I like to use both the petals if the flower is in bloom. Petals are edible. I can sugar them, use them on cakes or desserts. I can just eat them raw if I wanted, sprinkle them in salads, make teas out of them. However, my favorite thing to use with a rose are the rose hips. This is where most of the nutrients are. And if we think about plants in general, the petals are there to be pretty and to say, hey, pollinators, don't you love what I look like? I'm attracting you to my pollen. Yay. So the petals, really all they have to do is just look pretty. But for the most part, they're not going to be where most of the nutrients are. 9 times out of 10, when you have a flower, the purpose of that flower is to produce seeds. Well, 10 times out of 10, the purpose is to produce seeds. But the pollination method might change, and how those seeds get fertilized changes. For the most part, the nutrients are not going to be in the flower petals themselves. They're going to be in the seeds or the fruits that are produced. So as we go on with the presentation, you may see that, oh, the flowers are edible, but the seeds or the fruits is where the good stuff is at. That is the same for Multiflora Rose. These rose hips, or the little kind of fruits that are produced, are super, super high in all sorts of vitamins, all sorts of trace minerals that the body needs. And they have a bunch of phytochemicals that boost our immune system. So by the time these hips are produced, it's going to be late fall, early winter. Our immune systems are slowing down. Getting rose hips in our diet can help give us the boost that our body needs to get through the winter season. Next, we have Japanese Barberry. And this is actually very, very recently a no plant listed plant. And for a very long time, they were sold in nurseries and greenhouses. So a lot of people didn't know how invasive they really were and how invasive they could be. Now, one of the main problems with this is they produce thousands upon thousands of little seeds. They deter herbivory because they don't taste the greatest. So herbivores will say, well, there's nothing else in this area. I guess I'll overeat the native species that are here. And our native population of plants will dwindle. And with that comes more invasives. Japanese barberries also are primary highly desired habitat for deer ticks. So the more barberries we have in this area, or Japanese barberries, the more deer ticks, the more Lyme disease has the ability to spread. Which means that as you are removing this plant, you need to be very thorough. Wear gloves, also because there's thorns all up and down this plant. But wear gloves, wear long sleeves, long pants, and when you're done removing the plant, which is not the hardest thing, they don't get very big, and especially after a rain, when the soil is moist, you can pull them out or dig them out pretty easily. But you want to do a thorough tick check when you're done. Want to stay safe. But barberry, though, once you've all pulled that out and you have this huge plant that you're not going to compost, you're like, what do I do with it? The branches, the bark, the leaves, they actually create a beautiful light greenish yellow or chartreuse dye. So you can make paints or like tie-dye out of it. The fruits are edible, so those little red berry-looking things, they actually have a bitter flavor, which aids in digestion. So as we are eating and we are trying to stimulate healthy digestion to maximize our absorption of nutrients, these guys will help with that. The stem and the root bark contains something called berberine, hence the Latin name of berberis. This is an antimicrobial and antibacterial, so drinking teas, drinking tinctures of this bark steeped in tea or in hot water can be very good for our systems if we're fighting some sort of infection. Next, we have wineberry, and it's crazy to think how so many of these invasive plants came to be. For example, wineberry was brought over to help the raspberry population, and we were noticing when it was originally introduced that our raspberry commercial agriculture was going downhill. The raspberries were having a lot of issues. So the wineberry was supposed to be disease resistant, so it was supposed to be a great hybridizer and a way for our raspberries to become even stronger and healthier. In the long run, what happened was they actually were discovered to be a carrier for a disease that our raspberries get, and they wipe out native berry plants. They also spread very quickly, much quicker than our native berries do. Fortunately, though, we can pull them all up, we can dig them out, cut them way back to a manageable size, and then dig them up, including all the root systems. And the berries are so delicious. You would use them in any way that you would use any sort of raspberry, if you're making smoothies, pies, jams, desserts, anything that you want with them. And the leaves are edible as well. I put them in teas, so I'll dry the leaves and put them in tea, and that can act as an immune boost as well. The berries themselves are very high in antioxidants. So anti meaning none of, oxidant meaning something that will add oxygen. And in our bodies, as we metabolize our food, just the process of metabolism will introduce free radicals, or these kind of oxygen molecules that float around, not really doing anything or having any purpose. And those free radicals can actually increase our chances of cancer. It's like a form of radiation from the inside out. So it's crazy that our body just does that. But by ingesting things that are high in antioxidants, we're preventing those free radicals from floating around. And wineberries have been known to prevent cancer caused by oxidation in our bodies. They also aid in tissue repair. So when our skin cells or when internally we have cellular damage, they can help to speed that process of regeneration up. So these guys are really great for our nutritional qualities. So definitely using them when they have the berries, trimming them all the way back can help slow the spread of seeds. We also have Japanese honeysuckle in the area. Very viney, super, super girdling, likes to suffocate its supports that it's growing on. They are sunshine hoarders. So they'll climb up a tree, suffocate it, and then they'll be so happy that they have no competition for the sunshine. These are really a lot harder to remove. You have to hand remove them and dig up all of the root system. Similarly to the Multiflora Rose, cutting or pruning or mowing them back just encourages growth and it will speed it up. So we really want to, if you are going to cut it back, immediately remove the rest of the roots underneath the surface. The leaves are used dried to create like a gargle, and that can relieve sore throats, or if you have some sort of upper respiratory inflammation, that can help out with that.
Edibles?
The flowers, which you can see in this picture here, they're a yellowish white color. They are extremely sweet, very delicious. And if you're making syrups with them or teas, they can reduce inflammation just like the leaves would. And they're even known to reduce fevers. So as you are sick, you have a fever, you can drink some honeysuckle tea and that can help you out. Fortunately, very sweet, so they taste really good. One thing to note with Japanese honeysuckle and with honeysuckles in general, do not ever touch the berries. They may look very, very tempting, but the berries are toxic for humans. Next, we have garlic mustard. And if anyone likes pesto, if anyone likes the garlic flavor, this guy is going to be one of your favorite things to remove as an invasive. So you can go into any sort of woodland edge or meadow area. You'll probably find some growing in the spring. And you will want to hand remove these plants. Pretty easy to do, especially when the soil is nice and moist. And you want to do that before the plant goes to seed, because otherwise now you've just made really great habitat for those seeds to germinate. When you have that removed plant, you can use their leaves to create pesto, which is that little picture there that you can see my little blue dish of green gunk. That's the pesto I put on all sorts of pasta dishes. You can saute them just like you would an actual garlic bulb that you chop up. You can just add a couple leaves of the garlic mustard. I'll dry them and then sprinkle them on pizza like I would oregano or basil. And medicinally, these actually have great benefit to people with lung congestion. So people who have bronchitis, they'll notice that it helps to relieve a lot of that congestion in the lungs. It also promotes sweating. And if you are sick or have a buildup of toxins within the body, that excess sweating can help the body to quickly flush that out of the system. Then we have Lesser Celandine, which I kind of hinted to. This is the one that you do not want to eat. Lesser Celandine is very toxic when ingested. However, it is amazing as a skin ointment. This is very difficult, though, to get rid of. You have to be extremely persistent and very conscientious. These have little tiny tubers. Think mini, itty bitty little potatoes. They look like a potato the size of maybe your pinky nail. Very small and very plentiful. So as you dig up, they're pretty shallow, but as you dig, try not to fling dirt everywhere because you may have missed one of those little tiny tubers. And you may realize that, wow, you're now spreading this even more than if you just let it be. They can grow by having those tubers be fragmented. So it can really cause a lot of problems if, as you're digging, you're just flinging those tubers around. So be very conscientious as you are removing them. And then just like with others, plant something as immediately as possible in that empty space so that the celandine doesn't have a chance to reestablish itself. These chemically have something called a saponin in them. Saponin, just kind of like it sounds like soap a little bit. And these are plants, if they have a saponin in them, they are a little soapy. They can be a little slimy. They may taste or smell like soap. And for the most part, this is what makes Lesser Celandine not good for us. They have such a high quality or content of the saponins that it's not good for us to ingest. But just like the name suggests, they are amazing for soaps, for ointments, and have been very effective, scientifically proven at reducing hemorrhoids. So an amazing little plant in the right place. Then we have autumn olive. These are very quick to mature, and that's what makes them stand out among some of the other more woody or shrubby plants. They may take a long time to mature, maybe 5 to 10 years. But an autumn olive, once the seed germinates and it continues to grow, it only takes 2 to 3 years for this plant to mature and produce flowers and seeds that are viable. This means that they're very highly competitive and can take over spots very quickly. If you see little saplings of it, you can easily pull those out, but you may have to, just like some of the others, cut them all the way back down to the ground and then dig the rest of the root system out.
They really want us to start a website.
These are great for jellies, for syrups, for pies, for anything that you are going to add sugar to. So they're astringent, the berries are, meaning that they kind of have a acidic taste, and they can help to tonify the body. So they're going to taste really funny, and you'll have a strange experience with them if you just eat them raw. You may notice that when you eat them, all of a sudden, all of the moisture in your mouth is suddenly gone, and then it's suddenly back. That sugar, if you make a pie or a syrup or a jelly, you have so much sugar that it's going to cut that level of astringency, and you're not going to have that weird moisture wicking sort of feel in your mouth. These are great for your cardiovascular system, as that tonification quality that the autumn olive has will actually help to strengthen your heart. Next, we have Dame's Rocket. This, you may notice, is a common white or flower plant that grows in meadow or roadside environments. And many people get these confused with summer phlox. You can really tell a difference between them, not just in their time of bloom. The Dame's Rocket will bloom more along the lines of late April to May, whereas summer phlox is truly a summer blooming plant, being more June, July, August, depending on your climate. But they also only have 4 petals as compared to the phlox, which has 5. So that's definitely something, if you're going around and you are concerned about removing or accidentally removing a native phlox, count the petals and see, does it have 4 or 5? If it's 4, it's Dame's Rocket and it's safe to pull it out. You want to pull it out though before it produces seeds. Their seeds are very sticky and they can lay dormant in the soil for a very long time. So as a deer, as a rabbit, as people walk by, those seeds can stick to us and then fall out later and then sit there until the time is right for them to germinate. They have a very unique sweet and spicy flavor. So the petals are very sweet. And then you may see that where the petals connect to the petiole, or that little tiny stem-like thing that connects the flower to the real stem, it's a little swollen. And this is where those reproductive structures for pollinators sit. That is where that spicy, almost peppery flavor is. So if you are going to pick them, you can eat them raw. Make sure you get that swollen part. It's a very unique, very pleasant flavor. That makes it great for dunking in water and then dunking in sugar and using as garnishes for cakes or all sorts of cookies and desserts. It is a very unique flavor for syrups and teas as well. And when you're using it as a syrup or a tea and you're ingesting it, it can actually act as an expectorant. So if you have a cold and you're like, I just cannot get anything out, I'm coughing, but it's dry, it's not productive, the flowers will help with that. And finally, the last invasive species that I'm going to mention is the orange daylily. We may see this all over roadsides in the summer, and many of them, especially ones that are not garden cultivars, spread very quickly, very rapidly by seeds, and they have very dense tubers. Similar to the Lesser Celandine in that it's dense growth. However, these tubers are going to be the actual size of potatoes, not very, very small, so they're really obvious. And when you're digging them up, you can really tell if you got all the tubers up. The buds, so before it's a flower, when all those petals are still really tight together, those buds can be used in any way that you would use a potato. So you can boil them. My favorite thing to do is to roast them. They're delicious, very starchy, just like a potato would be. The petals, though, so once that bud bursts into bloom, they can be used in any way that you would use a leafy green or any sort of garnish. The petals themselves actually are antispasmodic, so if you have muscle cramping or your muscles are feeling very tense or they're spasming due to like a pinched nerve or just nervous tension, it will relax those muscles. And it can also be used as a laxative too. So if you're not feeling real great, nausea, you can eat these and it might help you feel better. They also are known to have some sort of analgesic anodyne effects, meaning that they are slight pain relievers. So if you have toothaches or your muscle aches because of how tense you are, the petals can help out with that.
Well, we don't have
now, as we go over, these were only a mild handful of invasive species here in Pennsylvania. We have over 250 documented invasive species. That list, to go over all of them, would take an eon, but hopefully these that you saw here will give you some sort of idea about some local ones that are very widespread and found in more than just Pennsylvania. You might find them along the entire east coast of North America or even wider spread still.
Well, Pennsylvania, she's from Colorado.
Oh,
all right. So now we got to talk about what do we do? So we've ripped up all these plants and we wanted to be very conscientious about our ecosystem in general. The purpose of us ripping these plants out is because they are causing some sort of ecological damage. So again, make sure that you have something that is a native species to your area. that will fill that hole that you have removed the invasive species from. So I have here, these are just 3 examples, but you might want to go on a website like Missouri Botanical Finder or Pennsylvania State Extension to see what native plants are in your area. But these are 3 that can be great replacements. So first is a black raspberry. This is a wonderful native substitute for the wineberry. So as you remove that wineberry, you get the leaves and you get the fruits, so you use them for yourself. Pop a black raspberry into that hole. They have still wonderful wildlife value, providing both habitat and food, and it's not going to spread as aggressively. If you have a plant, which we didn't talk about, but this is also on the list, an invasive calorie pear. A lot of people like them as ornamentals, but they sweet crab apple. It is a native species and also provides beautiful, beautiful flowers. It can range anywhere from a white to pink. So still very beautiful for that ornamental value, but it also provides nesting sites, habitat for wildlife, and still a great pollinator resource. The fruits of it can be used in the same way that you would use apples, making crabapple pie, making apple butters. Every fall I make crabapple cider, and it's really, really delicious. So you'll still have that value from it. And then we have the common elderberry. Even though it looks very different, I have this as a substitute for the invasive Japanese honeysuckle. We often think, oh, well, the honeysuckle, it's so sweet. I love the flowers. So let's find a plant that does the same thing for us, but is native. And the elderberry does that really well. We can use both the flowers and the berries. So unlike the Japanese honeysuckle that we have, it's very limited in our use. We can only use the leaves and the flowers. We can't use the berries. We can with the common elderberry. It also provides really valuable wildlife habitat, and that flat top of the flower provides a great habitat for pollinators and a diverse range of pollinators too that need that wide open space. So as I mentioned, the Missouri Botanical Finder or others of these plant finders, there's a woman, Ladybird Johnson, who was such an active figure in horticulture and botanical studies. And she said that native plants give us a sense of where we are in this great land of ours. I want Texas to look like Texas and Vermont to look like Vermont. Here in the United States, we have this really, really amazing geographical phenomenon that our country is filled with such rich biodiversity and such rich terrain. If we were to have these invasives just come and wipe out these native plants, we're having the whole entire country kind of just look the same. And Texas and Vermont and Pennsylvania and Washington all look so different. And this is a real motivation for maintaining our level of biodiversity beyond just, oh, I want to be conscientious about wildlife or pollinators, or I just want to be a good eco-steward. Let's all think about the biodiversity that comes from our native plant populations. So with that, are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Hi. Is it, I don't know, smart or allowable to do this anywhere other than property that you own?
That is a great question. You are right to be thinking along those lines. You only want to be ripping plants out of your own property.
Mm-hmm.
However, a lot of private lands if you go and you say, hey, you have these invasive species, I would like to forage, or I would like to remove them sustainably or ethically, they would be thrilled to have that free labor sort of thing. A lot of nature centers or local environmental organizations will actually organize invasive removal work days. And those are great to participate in. And usually once you're done with the removal, from my experience, they will absolutely let you take stuff.
Awesome.
As long as you're not planting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great,
So it's
great.
always better to ask. Save
Yes,
some
for
funds.
sure.
And if you think of something, down the road later this week, you can always feel free to email me your question. I can pop that in this recording. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube at The Art of Ecology, so you can find me there. And you can also ask questions or learn more on the blog on my website at www.theartofecology.com. So with that, I will bid you all farewell if there's no more questions. Yeah, thanks for joining in, and I hope to see you all at one of my other events later on in the year.